Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Homira Osman. I'm the VP of Research and Public Policy at a patient advocacy organization called Muscular Dystrophy Canada. And I also get to lead our patient engagement task force as part of a national pan-Canadian neuromuscular disease network for Canada, which is in fact funded and supported by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, Institute of Musculoskeletal Health, and Arthritis. I'm so pleased to welcome all of you to the 2024 collaborative series of webinars between PXP, for patients, by patients, and the Patient Engagement Research Ambassadors at the Canadian Institutes of Health Research Institute of Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis. This is actually our third of four webinars that have been taking place in 2024. Some of you may have attended our most recent PXP conference last month, which was outstanding. And so part of this webinar is really about maintaining, keeping up with that momentum. And so between this and the next PXP in September 2025, we'll continue to hold this webinar and webinar series. So that brings us to today's webinar. Today's webinar is about learning about different opportunities to engage as a patient partner. It's for and by patients, and it's open to anyone who's interested to listen and learn. And we're already so excited to see so many of you who are on the webinar already. This topic was actually designed by patient partners in research based on their own experiences. I'd like to pause and make a note around the language used. You might hear us throughout today's conversation use language like patient, patient partner, consumer, client, patient engagement, patient and family engagement, patient and public involvement. These terms really may vary depending on where you live, your own personal preferences. Regardless of the term we use, know that we're all here to talk about the same thing, which is really how people with different types of lived and living experiences are working in partnership with clinicians and researchers. I'd also like to pause and acknowledge the land we are meeting on. I'm calling in from Toronto, which is a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I know many of you are joining from different parts of the country as well. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available on the PXP website shortly after today. It's important to note that we do have closed captioning available today. You can turn that on by selecting the CC button at the bottom of your screen. You can also select the language of your choice by clicking on the arrow next to the CC. We'll wait a moment as if anyone would like to turn on the captioning. Throughout today's webinar, I really encourage all of you to use the chat. This is meant to be an interactive, dynamic webinar. Use the chat if you want to share resources, share comments, or share a little bit about yourself. Anything shared in the chat will be kept anonymously and summarized and shared on the PXP website. Because the chat moves quickly for questions, we really suggest that you direct your questions on the Q&A button. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen as well. If typing in the Q&A is a barrier, we can take a few verbal questions. So please click on the raise hand button and then we'll be able to unmute you. You do not have to turn your camera on, but please be aware asking a verbal question will mean your voice and name will be part of our recording. And of course, if social media is your thing, which we're so grateful many of you shared the advertisement for this webinar on social media, please use our hashtag PXP24. We'd love to hear about your impressions, some takeaways from today on social media. As I mentioned right at the outset, this webinar is supported by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, particularly the Institute of Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to our panelists. And if it's okay, I'll actually start off with you, Deb. I'd love for you to introduce yourselves to our audience.
Okay, my name is Deb Baranec, and I'm a patient partner and a very proud member of PARA, which is the Patient Engagement Research Ambassador Program with CIHRM. I'm a retired auditor and I've been married for 54 years. I got a couple of kids and four great granddaughters. And I live in Calgary, which is located in the heart of southern Alberta. where I acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7. And I advocate for better health and care for everyone, but in particular for those suffering from obesity and osteoarthritis. Because for many more years than I care to admit of my 72 years of being around, I suffered from both those and just didn't have a voice, wasn't being acknowledged, those sorts of things. So I like to advocate for those who don't have the voice or can't use their voice for better outcomes in both those areas. And I could go on and tell you about how I got arthritis or osteoarthritis, but it's a long story. Skiing like a lunatic, and I didn't learn my lesson at all because I did it very many times and tore up my left knee to the point where pretty soon I was wearing a brace, one of many over 35 years, and was suffering from osteoarthritis and then gaining weight and gaining more weight and until I damaged the other knee just stepping up into a bus. So from all that, I experienced lots of closed doors and employment opportunities and promotional opportunities when I did get a job because all they see is this very overweight person and they don't really acknowledge you or anything like that. Um, and then I made a personal decision to get myself into a better place when I was about 54. And with my family support, I retired and I joined a gym, lost some weight, went to my doctor, asked her to refer me to a bariatric surgeon because I thought I wanted to take the easy way out. Well, I shouldn't say the easy way. For me, that would have been the easy way. For other people, it's a very hard choice. And I shouldn't, yeah. Anyways, I'll stop there before I really get my foot in my mouth.
We're really delighted to have you here, Deb, and
Yeah.
looking forward to
So,
learning more about yourself and your experience throughout
yeah.
today's call. Tucker, can I throw it over to you to introduce yourself? Oh, I know Tucker just went off video, which is fine. I'll give Tucker a moment. Perhaps Beth, is that okay if I
Yeah,
move over to you? Right.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Amir. Yeah, my name's Beth Ciavaglia. I'm from Ottawa. I am trained as a physiotherapist and spent most of my career working in hospitals and then transitioned to long-term care. Presently working in the food insecurity sector, social service sector, where I run a charity. I came to this work through a cancer diagnosis, breast cancer, 5 years ago, a few weeks before my 40th birthday. And that's kind of left me with some. I don't think people think about musculoskeletal side effects traditionally when you think about cancer or breast cancer, but after surgeries and radiation, it definitely does things to your joints and your range of motion. So those are the things I continue to live with. My work as a patient partner has been with Para alongside DAB, the Terry Fox Research Institute, and the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research. That's where I started off after my oncologist referred me along there, and that was in a patient and family advisory council.
Wonderful. I am seeing that Tucker is joining us again. Tucker, can you hear me okay? And are you okay to go ahead and introduce yourself? Perfect.
Yeah, hopefully my internet won't cut out again. Um, I'm Tucker. I'm in Halifax. We're having some rain right now. I have been working in patient partnership for the past 4 years, I think it was, and have had lots of opportunities, just especially in the past couple years. But I am 33. I suffer from rheumatoid arthritis since my early 20s. I'm transgender, so I go by he, him pronouns. I am a tattoo shop owner and manager. A lot of people think that that means that I do tattoos, but I do not. Um, I'm a high school dropout and I have ADHD. So if I seem fidgety at all amongst this meeting, that's just me being unable to keep still. Um, Let me think. I mean, that's the basis of who I am, but my patient partner work happened just really coincidentally through my best friend, who's a bit older than me, who was already a part of a local, very small anesthesia patient partner research group. Um, and when I got into it, I thought, what qualifications do I have? But you know what? I was very surprised because as a patient partner, whatever your experience is experience. And that's really what matters. That's all I can think of right now.
No, that's a perfect note to actually go into our first question, and I'll actually direct this to each of you. Beth, maybe you can kick us off with the with your answer here. But you know, getting the title here is around different opportunities to engage as patient partners. Can you tell us a little bit about what opportunities you've been involved in? What does that actually look like when we talk about being involved in research studies? Is that about regular meetings? Is it about reviewing things? Would love to hear more about that real life work as a patient partner.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So I started off again, I didn't know about this work. I was a fairly like vocal patient. Um, and so my oncologist actually sent me the email to join the Patient and Family Advisory Council of the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research. They had just like they had put in their strategic plan, they want to incorporate patients more in their work. So this is how they kind of set about doing it. And it was like it was an interview process. And within that council, they did and continue to do. I chaired them for the last year. They do like consultations with research. They partner in specific studies, review grants, advise, like advisors, I think is a really good term. So in that work, I think we checked a few of the boxes. We get invited to conferences too and sit on panels. They were really, really active and really well supported by the organization. So and you can really feel that. Much as same as CJR, you know when that support is there. So really, it was like a range of things, and there was also opportunities to speak, like to public speak, if that's something you're into. I did a bit of that as well.
Deb, how about yourself? What types of different activities have you been involved in as a patient partner?
Well, before I was actually a patient partner, how it all started is I was asked to speak to the third year med students about my journey of wellness because I guess my knee surgeon, when she replaced both knees, she was kind of impressed with everything. And she was also running the program at the University of Calgary. So that's what I first started doing and just doing some public speaking and talking about my wellness journey and they would ask such a myriad of questions. It just got me more and more curious. And somebody seen that, and then I got asked to join a brace study, which I had knowledge of. And that was sort of my first step into it. And then since then, it's just grown. I'm on, well, with Para, and I'm with a couple other organizations. I work with several groups at the University of Alberta, and yeah, it's a great experience. I just love it.
Wonderful. Tucker, how about yourself? What types of activities are you involved in as a patient partner?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the small anesthesia research group, which I was invited to, and through it did a whole bunch of talking with researchers, and it wouldn't necessarily be related to anesthesia. Could be related to really anything. It was just kind of like, oh, there is a patient partner group that we can access in Halifax. But also through that, then I've done a couple. Well, I did a workshop. I was a panelist on a workshop this year at Dal, and uh, I was also last year. Was it last year? I was invited to be a part of the very first patient partnership group within the Institute of Genetics of Canada. So I am now part of that group, and it's really cool.
That is really cool. Um, so I've heard about, a few different ways you've all been involved. Now that you have had experience, whether it be reviewing grants, public speaking, sitting in on meetings, sitting in on these different committees, is there a preference for the types of project you're involved in? Tucker, do you have a preference?
I mean, I do feel more geared towards specifically things that involve rare diseases or genetic diseases because of my rheumatoid arthritis, or just anything that I have personal experience in. So I have some ex mostly personal experience in that background, but I also like being a representative for the queer community as well. So I haven't had an opportunity that I felt like I wanted to turn down yet. Let's say that.
Beth?
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I always like the opportunities that involve learning. I remember once I said, and I remember thinking, ooh, maybe that was too honest. But like, I do need to get a little bit out of it myself. So if I'm learning something, then I think that's worthwhile. So I do enjoy going to conferences, whether it's a panelist or just being invited as a patient partner. One of the favorite ones I did once was sort of like, yeah, I guess it was closer to a workshop, but we each sat at individual tables with researchers. I thought that was really, really interesting. And I think I did the opening words or opening statement for that one. I also like writing. I personally like writing. And I recently had like a patient perspective article published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So that was kind of like a highlight for me. And then I was able to write that like in my own language. Like it's not written like a journal article. It was from taken from my perspective with my words.
That's great. I have to tell you, folks in the audience are really agreeing with you on the learning aspect and how that is something that attracts people to opportunities like this as well. Great. I can go on to this next question. And Deb, perhaps you can share how you came about, initially getting called on to be part as a patient partner. You did speak about having, being invited to speak about your wellness journey. But since then, how do you really keep up with these different opportunities? How do you learn about them? How do you seek different opportunities?
Well, some of them are by word of mouth. Somebody's heard about me, or I've worked with them in the past and they have a new study and gee, they'd like my perspective, or, they just want a letter of support. And that has grown, and now I'm a co-applicant on some grant applications. Um, and I also have joined a couple of other networks, and I will kind of look at opportunities as well and see if there's a fit because being retired, I have the luxury. I can pick and choose. And so, I'll do that like the Patient Advisory Network or Alberta SPORE unit. And I think even AB for Alberta Health. I think they have some as well. And I'll look at that, or I'll look at the U of A or the U of C, look and see what they got on their websites, just see what's happening. And yeah, that's what I do.
That's great. Beth, how about you? How do you find opportunities?
You know what? One of the best places has been for me, which actually has opened up about a lot of stuff that I never would have thought of before, is LinkedIn. So I found, I think, I think this was CIHR was through LinkedIn. The call for applicants was through LinkedIn. You can, you can search under patient partner, obviously. A lot of researchers on LinkedIn, and so you can just. I always found people very receptive, either like quote unquote cold calling them. I don't call, I just send a slide into their DMs I can ask if they know. That's worked really, really well. So that's kind of like my go-to place for finding new opportunities and kind of sharing more of my patient partnership work as well.
Tucker, I know you haven't turned down any opportunities yet, and it seems like folks are coming to you, but have you looked into any opportunities or sought any opportunities? And if so, what channels are you looking at and how are you finding those opportunities?
Actually, I think alternate to the other two, I do typically have opportunities kind of call on me, and I think it's because of the type of person that I am. an entertainer. I'm a musician and I did a lot of acting as a youth as well. So I've always been very vocal about my experience. And when I opened my tattoo shop, it's a queer-centered tattoo shop. So when we started talking about that, we got a lot of opportunities to talk about it, and I was open about my arthritis. So through that, I've been reached out by um, Arthritis Society Canada, and I just recently was on CNN Morning News Atlantic for them. So kind of alternatively, if you're just sort of open to experiences and do a lot of networking, to me, networking is kind of the main aspect that I get opportunities through. The workshop that I did just this past summer, um, there were some people involved there who then invited me to do this. So just by taking opportunities, you then typically might get invites to do other opportunities through just saying yes.
While I'm not a panelist, I should add as someone who, gets to work on a patient advocacy organization. If your condition that you're personally affected by has a patient organization, that could be one mechanism to find opportunities. I know at Muscular Dystrophy Canada, researchers will come to us and say they are looking for patient partners, and we help to match them to people who have similar lived experience that would be a good match. So we've talked about different opportunities that you've been engaged with, but how do you, when going into that relationship and into that partnership, what are your expectations on how your input, how your participation is used by the people you work with, the projects you're a part of? Beth?
I think, yeah, I think my expectation is not just to be somebody who is consulted after the work is done. So ideally, I'm pulled in, let's say it's a research study or something. Ideally, I'm pulled in as early as possible, perhaps even at like the question phase or question development phase, um, pre-approval before maybe even get the funds to go. I'm not as excited about or keen to just be like the last check on something. Um, and I think also my expectation too is if I'm going to be in the room and I'm going to take my time, like give of my time, whether it's paid or unpaid, I it has to sort of be genuinely worthwhile to everybody. And sometimes in this space it can get a little tricky where like that the tokenism kind of comes in a little bit, like, oh, there's a patient in the room and we're going to check the box. You figure that out pretty quick, whether that's the circumstance or not. But yeah, I just my expectation would be that my opinion and expertise is considered sort of alongside of, not secondary or not lesser than.
Tucker, do you participate in initiatives where you have the initiatives are based on your condition, or now are you more part of projects that are based on someone living with a disability, or as you mentioned, being someone who's queer or transgender? Is it very particular to a condition now, or have you really brought in the types of projects you're involved in?
I do think that they've mostly been directly related to my rheumatoid arthritis, but also just having a lot of experience in the medical world, as most patient partners do. Um, could you reiterate the question a little bit? I'm having trouble thinking about my response.
No, I think so back to the type of work that I get to do, neuromuscular conditions are rare and some are even ultra rare. So finding projects or initiatives for that single condition might be challenging, but there are some opportunities that are more in general being a quote unquote patient or living with disease or disability. Wondered if you had experience mainly in just your condition type projects or ones that were about, as you mentioned, navigating the medical world.
Yeah, I mean, it's still pretty early days for me as a patient partner. It's only been a couple years. And like I said, the more opportunities have really only started happening in the past couple years. So it has mostly been pertaining to my particular uh, realm of illness. And along with ticking the boxes, like Beth mentioned, I do think that I tend to be kind of a tokenized queer, but I really don't mind that because like I said, I'm very open to talking about my experiences. So I, it's important to have those experiences represented as well. And I don't mean I don't mind being tokenized. I like to feel special.
Deb, how about yourself? Participating on initiatives that are based on your condition or more generally about living with a health condition in general?
I think originally it was more living with a health condition, but and I probably don't have too many more years doing this than you do, Tucker, but it sort of has graduated more to experience as a patient partner, what I've learned from working on other groups and what I can bring to the table to help new projects and what I've learned. And to Beth's point, if I'm not learning, it's not good. I will walk away from a project if I feel I'm not learning. And I'm like Tucker, I don't mind being a token as long as I'm learning. I'm getting something out of it. Good. They might be getting a little something out of it, but I'm getting just as much, if not more. So I don't mind that. But if it's really overt, then yeah, I'll just go, nah, gonna cut it off here and move on. But or we'll have the discussion and see if we can fix it. So, but yeah, it's more about my experiences now and being an ex-auditor, I bring a lot of look in the boxes. Let's see if all the processes work too. So.
Deb, that actually reminded me of a question that Beth, when I heard your intro, I wanted to ask you, and I think I'll use this opportunity to ask, which is, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned you're a health professional by training. How do you sort of keep your professional experience separate from your patient experience? And is it important to keep that separate when participating as a patient partner? Deb just mentioned that she leverages it as a past auditor in helping to keep things organized, but how about yourself?
I think it brings me like a fair amount of empathy. So I remember I was at a table once and the person put forward the suggestion of, when the day the patient gets diagnosed, we should just get them to sign a form that automatically like signs them up or gives consent for like all the studies, like all the things, right on the first day when you meet them. And part of me was like, I get it. Like as a healthcare worker, your time is so like narrow and you see these like little windows and you want to like get the stuff done. Um, and I remember when he sort of said that, and everyone like, I think I was the only patient at the table that day, and everyone was like, "Yeah, great idea." And I was like, "No, like, don't come to me with that. Like the moment after I find out I have cancer or whatever, and like I'm not ready to hear that. I'm not ready to hear that. But I understand as a healthcare professional that that's what advances your work, and but you need to give that some time. Like you need to come back on that. So I do think it gives me uh, it's given me a lot of perspective. It's given me a lot of empathy, but it also has sort of given me like maybe a little extra um, ability to shed light, like on the background of the thinking, and to understand, like I know you have to see X 20 people a day, and I know that's not your choice, and I know that you have to do things, and and this is important too.
Yeah, and I think those in the audience are agreeing with you, Beth, on that, which is really to say it's really hard. It's difficult to separate ourselves and as a professional and as a patient. It's the context of your experience and really more than, impacted by a condition or conditions. There's more to our lives. So I think that speaks well to it. So speaking about, this professional aspect of it, I think I'll ask more in terms of, have you ever been asked to be trained formally as part of a study or initiative you've been part of? So have you been asked to take some training on participating in patient partnerships? Tucker?
I've been offered training on a couple of instances pertaining to mostly like grant um stuff, which actually I said that I haven't denied any opportunities, but I deny grant writing. Um, Mostly just because I could probably do it, but I'm just not mentally prepared for that aspect yet. So, um, yeah, I've been offered training, but I haven't been asked to do it specifically in order to participate for anything new.
Deb, how about you?
Okay.
Have you participated in training?
Yeah, I was asked to take some training on ethics, especially for the first group I was working with, because we were going to be working with live humans, and I totally understood it, and I'm so glad I did take it because it's important in everything how we're dealing with people. And then I've been asked to take some modules. Most recently, I'm working with a group with AI for MRI imaging. So they asked me if I would take some learning modules explaining a bit about AI because I have about this much knowledge of AI and they have this much knowledge. So it helped me a little bit to understand and pick up the jargon at least. And so I understand when we're in meetings what they're talking about. So,
Maybe I can ask this question now a different way. I think Beth, you also said that you haven't taken any
correct.
training. Maybe I'll ask it a different way. Having the experiences in the past few years as a patient partner in research initiatives, is there training you wish you were offered or wish you had taken to maybe enhance your experience or enhance your knowledge? Beth?
Yeah, I think, I learned through kind of osmosis and just meeting with them, but I would have loved to have maybe understood better before I started or right at the beginning, um, like the levels of bureaucracy and stuff that come before a trial even starts. Because I think as a patient, we're very like outcome focused a lot of the times. Like, why haven't you cured this and why haven't it happened? But once you understand the process that it takes to get from like A to like Z, and then you're like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So now I think that if I knew more, a little bit more about that context originally, that probably would have helped me. I got there eventually, but probably would have been helpful if someone just sort of sat me down and be like, this is how it really is.
That's great. That's great. So it sounds like there are different types of roles and initiatives that people can take part of. I hope this is an okay question to ask each of you because you do put a lot of time and efforts into these opportunities. Have you been offered compensation to be part of different initiatives? Does it really vary depending on the type and the role? Deb?
I'll have to think about that one. Could you come back to me for that one?
Yeah. Tucker or Beth, has compensation ever been offered in terms of participating on research projects?
Yeah, I when I worked with OICR, they actually created a policy um, and enacted a policy from scratch, obviously after consultation with other organizations. Um, it where it was essentially like $30 an hour. So it's like it's something. It's not a ton of money, but so that was formalized within the organization, and so everyone followed the policy. Um, CIHR has a policy that is followed. I I have worked in an organization that didn't have a policy and continues to not. And when I've sort of brought that forward, didn't really necessarily get like a warm and fuzzy reply or an apron. And I think there are some organizations that just aren't there yet. So then you kind of have to like be like yeah, you're sort of weighing things out. And for me, sort of like we've been talking about before, that might come back to like the learning opportunity or the networking opportunities that one provides. But generally for me, I've been offered compensation more often than not.
And Tucker, would you say that that's similar to your experience as well?
I have been really lucky, again, maybe because I'm only a couple years into the game. I've never not been offered compensation, and sometimes it's more than other times, but it's always appreciated. And I think it's given me a good, I like mindset of not to be under, and it's not even necessarily underappreciated, but just not considered that how much this can take out of you. I mean, it's a lot of emotional labor and mental labor. So, and sometimes physical labor. So to be it feels very considerate and like they're really moving along and getting better at realizing that this isn't like a volunteer position. This takes a lot of
Absolutely.
chutzpah.
I really love how you put that. It's emotional labor, it is mental labor, and at times physical, whether it's writing or thinking and all of that. So then that brings me to how do you balance time, your condition, opportunities, and how are you making those decisions in terms of participating or not, or and balancing different aspects? Deb, would you like to tell us how you're
Yeah, I'll jump
balancing?
into this one. I don't have to give it much thought. Like I said, I'm retired, so I'm very fortunate. I have the time. But I value my personal time as well. And especially in the summer, we have a granddaughter that stays with us for the summer. So there's lots of golfing, there's lots of bake sales. And I like spending time with my husband and my family and reading and, listening to my husband's vinyl collection. So, but I liked my time when I'm working with the groups. And a friend of mine, I think she's on the chat, she works Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursdays. Well, in the whole year, I work Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. Come summertime, the Tuesdays and Thursdays are totally out. But so I kind of follow her lead and kind of try to keep it balanced.
I find sometimes too this work can really spiral. That happened to me once where like again people get to know you or like one researcher will say something to another, one group to another, and then you're just getting like a lot of requests. And I was finding like too much of my time was spent in front of the computer because a lot of it, at least my work, had been virtual. And so then I was like, oh, I don't really want to do that. And every little request can be small, like it might be like attend this 1 hour meeting or speak on behalf of this, but it all like adds up. And sometimes I would overcommit and I had to almost like learn the hard way, like overcommit myself a bit and be like, this is too much. And as someone who now works 9 to 5, there are times too where I can't reliably be available at 1 p.m. on a Friday. So I would be like, yeah, I'll try. And then I just can't be there. And so it had sort of come to a point too where I'm like, yeah, this I just can't make this commitment. Depending on the size of the group, maybe it's whatever. You might be able to do that, or you might be able to continue with it and just show up, whatever. Other ones, if it's a very small group, if you can't make it regularly, then maybe it's better to give someone else an opportunity.
Becker, how about you? How are you balancing work and life and managing time with the different opportunities?
Well, I'm very lucky that I own my own business, and that I'm very verbal with my team about how limited my energy is physically. And I don't have much of a social life, and that's partially by choice and partially because of my disability. It's pretty difficult to get around. So I haven't been too overwhelmed by opportunities that I've had to say no to anything.
You mentioned the social aspects of, in general, navigating a disability, and sometimes that might be challenging in terms of participating in social situations or maintaining social relationships. We heard that learning is one benefit that comes out of participating in partnerships like this. Are there any examples where it gives some social opportunities as well, or is this really purely feeling more like professional and kind of keeping in that boundaries? Or are there opportunities where you feel like this is helping me feel socially fulfilled or my social goals are fulfilled as well?
When I was on the Patient and Family Advisory Council, I made some great friendships, and one of the things I liked about that is was like the collaboration, and we weren't constantly interacting with researchers or in that context all the time, and I really like that, and I still consider a few of those people friends.
That's kind of what happened to me as well. I've worked on that brace study, and because it was over COVID, we really got to know each other. And it was supposed to only be a 1 year type study, but it went to 3 years because a number of different reasons. But we became such good friends that outside of the research world, we meet for once or twice a year, and and try to have a family day together, like, get together for dinner, for, an afternoon lunch or whatever. And yeah, so that's important as well. Sometimes you have to be careful. You got to watch the boundaries when you get into groups. Some people definitely will put up barriers and say, this is the space I'm only willing to work in, and you have to respect that. For some reason, our group, we just said, okay, we're going to work together and get through this, especially when we had to work through COVID and try to make everything work, right?
That's really good to hear. We'll actually go to a question that's in the Q&A, and it's from Linda, Nixick, who's a fabulous patient partner that I've had the privilege to work with. And Linda's asked each of you to describe a time when you faced a barrier as a patient partner, and if you can help us walk through how you managed, how you coped with that experience, and how did that lead to a better outcome? Beth?
Hmm. I think I might just take a more second to think on that one if anyone else has an answer ready.
Well, I really didn't have a barrier as a patient partner, more as a patient. And it's probably when I weighed my most. And I went to see a doctor and I barely got through the door. Um, and he put up his hand and just said, come back and see me after you've lost 100 pounds without talking to me or anything like that. And I kind of always keep that in the back of my mind when I think about research and health in general and having better outcomes. I don't want anyone to ever have to have that hand, whether it's a physical hand or it's a verbal, whatever, but I don't want them to ever experience that. And not that I did anything about it at the time, but it's always been in the back of my head as I went through my journey and got to a better place and started what I hope is helping other people so that they don't get that hand.
Tucker or Beth, navigating a difficult situation as a patient partner, and how did you help to course correct or address, or maybe, even a change really didn't lead to the optimal outcome, but anything challenging that you want to share as a patient partner?
Yeah, mostly informationally, is that a word? I don't know. Wise. With my first real experience as a patient partner through the small anesthesiology group, we were having a lot of researchers come in and tell us all about their research projects. And I know that sometimes I have trouble following along, but I found my confidence in being able to ask the really simple questions and not wait on it and then feel dumbed down or anything like that, especially in terms of, yes, uh, terms that they might use or, just clarifying things. Yeah, mostly just stuff like that. Not anything terribly big, mostly just being able to ask questions, even though I might feel like lesser intelligence, you know.
Yeah, the only thing I think of with that example I had where I sort of advocated for the organization to consider payment for their patient partners, and it just didn't land. And then I I think I just had to put some boundaries up for myself. So instead of like making sure it's at every meeting and all the things, I was like, you know what, it's there. I might stop in, I might not. It's a large group. You can kind of get away with doing that. Um, when they offered to fly people to the conference, I did that. That one was good. So I was sort of just like giving myself the permission to do this the way that makes the most sense to me. And at first I kind of thought the payment was a barrier, but then I realized it's not entirely for me. It was just that what am I willing to do or how much am I willing to commit based off of their policy.
Great. Earlier in our conversation, I heard Beth and Tucker use the term tokenistic and in different ways, but you know, I would hope that the research partners that are working on these initiatives and studies aren't intentionally hoping to be tokenistic. But the question I'm getting at is,
Yeah.
as a patient partner, how do you sense that tokenism is happening? How does that come across? Because it'd be really nice to hear how that looks. We can hear how it feels, but how does that look? I'll give you an example, something that we're working on, which is around grant competitions. When we have peer reviewers who are people with lived experience, ensuring their scores are weighted the same as the academic, medical, scientific reviewers. And in the past, that hasn't been the same. It's been on two different scales, and that can appear tokenistic, and that wasn't the intention, but that I can sense that. So I'd love to hear about where you have felt that and how did that look like. What did that look like?
We had the same conversation too with one of the organizations talked about where we were giving feedback just on the patient, like the lay summary. We would give some feedback just on that. And then we were sort of invited to read through the rest of the application, but didn't necessarily have to. And then the idea came forward of like, well, or I guess the question, like, how much is that feedback weighted? How does that look like? And then realizing it, was taken into account, but there was no like scoring, but there's all this other like complex scoring system for when the other researchers do that. And so we brought up the idea and we knew it was happening other places, could we be like, could our feedback go into the score? And our sort of facilitator was a great guy and probably just didn't think about it when he said it. He's like, but what happens if you don't agree? And I said, I don't know what happens. Like, so that was just like a little bit of a moment. I found like it's a bit of a moment and to see how they kind of ride that. And the other time for me was I was a specific patient partner on a specific study, which I don't typically do. And the study went so fast. It was like done in like 4 months, and everything was kind of like done before I could really even get into it. And I did feel that was like when I was kind of pulled in, they're like, so what do you think? But like the summary had already been sent, or like I don't know. But I think that's not normal. I kind of understood that wasn't really the usual cadence of studies.
Mine is a kind of a much more obvious tokenism, where I have yet to meet any other patient partners who identify as transgender. So typically I know right away. Specifically on like, I mean, typically patient partners are people often with medical conditions. So it's harder to be tokenized for, because when I think of tokenism, I think of minorities. Um, so yeah, it tends to be really obvious for me. And again, I don't mind it because there should be representation from my community, right?
Do you have any experiences where you felt like, oh, is my participation here, my input feeling tokenistic?
Oh, yes. I've had those where you get the eye rolls when you voice something and you're thinking, well, your eyes are just going to go back to your back of your head, but you kind of get past it. And on one group, they had they had us as patient partners, but they had a go-between. We couldn't talk to the real team. We could only talk to this person. And then he would talk to them, get all the info, bring it back, and then talk to us. And it took us about a year, the patient partners, to say, well, that isn't really what patient-oriented research is all about. And he took that feedback back to the team and they started seeing, yeah, they're right. Maybe we should, even if we didn't get really involved in the meetings, we were part of it all. We could hear it, experience it, and maybe we didn't share anything, but we knew what was going on. We didn't always have to have this go between. And to me, that was very tokenistic. But it took us about a year. We changed them and made them think a different way. And just persevered.
Yeah. And I know sometimes that can feel uncomfortable to navigate and it can take some time, like a year, but so important to address, right? So that was a really solid example
Well,
to,
we felt it was very difficult for the person in the middle.
oh yeah.
Like they were sort of like the messenger. And I felt, well, what happens to the messenger in most tragedies?
Yeah.
They're usually gone. We didn't want that to happen. We kind of liked that messenger.
Yeah. There's another question in the Q&A, which is that if you were involved in research projects early enough, how were you able to influence the research questions towards a patient perspective? So oftentimes scientists, clinicians, researchers might already have a program of research and the next idea of what they'd like to be studying. How have you shifted that or influenced that if you've been involved early enough in that stage?
Unfortunately, I haven't been involved that
Yeah.
early. The question has usually been fleshed out. And so I haven't had that much influence other than to say, well, have you thought of this or you thought of that, just to add a little more input. But basically, the question is already there.
I was involved with, it's recent actually. I couldn't be involved in the selection process because, again, they made it like a full day, like a Wednesday from like 9 to 5. I could not give. But what they did was they actually set a fairly large, I think it was actually $1 million aside, and this patient group, this large patient group, got to decide the themes, and then the call for applications went out, and the researchers got to come back. Now they already have the questions, but like they got to create their own questions, but they had to pertain to these sort of patient directed themes, which is interesting. I don't know the outcome yet, but I think they got like 40 some applications. And then most recently, again, I didn't really change the question per se, but I just made them think about, like, they already had the idea, they had the question, they kind of had it all laid out, but it was like the terminology they were using. Like there was like a standard of care, and then they were calling the research or the intervention group personalized care, but it wasn't personalized care at all. It was just a different standard. Um, but yeah, I've never actually like molded a question before. That would be like awesome.
Tucker, how about yourself? Any ability to influence research questions at the early stages?
I'm trying to remember. Like I said, with the anesthesiology group, more often than not, our meetings were revolved around researchers who were not even in the process of in their research project, but at the beginning stages. So before they even were proposing it. So we often got questions about the presentation towards gearing towards getting patients to participate in it. And I actually did feel like we were able to influence maybe not necessarily the questions, but the approach towards patients about reaching out to them. But excitingly enough, that anesthesiology group is actually working on its own research project right now. So we have full control over the entirety of it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And as I'm thinking about the question, I mean, this doesn't happen as often, but there's a methodology which is like the James Lind Alliance priority setting, where patients and clinicians and researchers can together say what are some unanswered questions or questions they'd like to learn about, and then you can sort of rank them into your top 10. That is one way that would be ideal in really making sure that the research questions align with patient priorities. But as I mentioned, that isn't always the case with every condition or different research programs. What advice do you have for someone newer to this space looking to get involved? What would be the advice you'd give to someone who's on the call today, hasn't participated yet, but looking to get involved? Tucker?
Well, I think that the others had really good avenues for reaching out through whatever organizations that they mentioned. But I guess because it's patient partnership has really only been around for like the past decade, maybe a little bit longer or less, but because of the internet, there is so much information already out there.
Good advice, I would say, is in terms of being open to new opportunities and learning more about them and demonstrating your advocacy can likely have those teams be attracted to someone like yourself. So
For sure.
making it known. I mean, Beth, you mentioned that as well, which is not necessarily cold calling, but expressing your interest and reaching out is a good strategy in terms of becoming
Yeah,
a
yeah, for sure. And I think there's like sometimes too, before you kind of step into this work, you want to consider, are you interested in really the research aspect of it? Like, do you want to be involved in research, or are you really trying to affect like in real time care? Because I've come across people in this space where they really just want to affect real time care and they want to make like that hospital better right now or the clinic. And so there's opportunities for that, right? There's these councils, they exist at hospitals and see ads for them. I see a lot again, LinkedIn. All the hospitals will say, "We're looking for a new patient and family advisor." Remember, I sit on a board of directors. We were always looking for somebody. So that's thing too, and that's like I think that's a big, it's a different role. So to that person who's looking to kind of step into this, maybe that's the first question. And if you're looking more for that kind of straight up advocacy, hospitals are always happy to bring you on. Otherwise, yeah, I would really leverage the internet. My oncologist was a researcher, a clinician and a researcher. So he had a foot in, and that's why I think, and we still sort of connect, and I'll do some things with him on a research side of it. So that's another thing too. If you have, I don't know, depending on what the illnesses that you deal with, sometimes the person that provides the care will also do research. They're great people to connect with if you can find them.
Deb, what would you say if someone felt really, interested but anxious, unsure, no experience, and thinking about that first time of maybe delving into an opportunity like this? What advice would you give them?
Well, I'd say, just look at your local, as Beth said, talking to even maybe to your doctor. My knee doctor who did my surgery, she was also a teacher and educator and into research, and she had connections and, would talk about different things, not necessarily saying, do you want to get involved or anything, but it just piqued my interest. So, and there's just so many, as Tucker said, there's so many internet opportunities within your own backyard. And if you have a specific disease or condition that you want to know more about, maybe you don't want to be a patient advocate, but maybe you want to know more about a research that's going on, you can just check in on those and just start your journey and see where it takes you and just be open, as Tucker says, you're being open to new opportunities, new ideas, new thoughts, new experiences, hearing how other people think and manage their stuff. So
I'd like to return to the point around participating in a grant review process. So whether it be CIHR as a funding body or organizations, when selecting research, they often look to medical, scientific, academic reviewers to appraise or sort of see the relevance of the project and rate it and provide scoring. We started to talk about this, Beth, but has anyone experienced a gold standard where patient input has been well received and well incorporated? Are there good examples of patient participation on grant reviews?
I think that example I was using where I wanted to be involved, but because I worked a 9 to 5 job and they're asking for a full day, like a full day of your time, and then also the time it was going to take to read the grants, and they were breaking them up into groups. So each person got like six or something, and then you had to come back together. And even though, yeah, due to my time constraints, I wasn't able to do it. You could tell too, they were just getting it was their first time doing it. So like kudos, but they were getting a little squirrely because then it was like, well, we might just do like a second level check-in. So like, you're like, well, I'm not sure if the patients can really make this decision themselves. We might just like throw in the researchers at the last minute. Um, So yeah, I don't think I have. I heard the Canadian Cancer Society does a really good job of this, but I haven't personally.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything that stands out in any way. I mean, I did do some grant reviewing, and I thought it was really good that they provided like a Rubik's type grid to do your stuff, to do your grading and everything. And it was the same one that everyone else was using, not just the patient partners. So I felt that that was good. And it helped me, guided me because I had never done it before. So it made it a lot easier to understand where what was important and maybe what was just extraneous stuff. And then I read it with the eye of what was important for me as a patient partner as well.
Which is so important because to Beth's point earlier around, sometimes when you're reading the project, it might be from the lens of how do I change care today, now, versus sometimes thinking about that more 30,000 but view lens of this, of how's this going to change the research down the line, or how's this going to contribute in a way. And I know someone had also shared in the chat an example of a possible good standard for patient input and grant review. But it seems like there's opportunities to improve, whether it be different timing, whether it be the rubric itself, whether it be the guidance. I think that that's an area where this is becoming more common, but the practices need to be more improved and standardized for sure.
Yeah,
How, oh, go ahead.
sorry, I was just wanted to interrupt for a moment. Just another thing to kind of keep aware of is that nothing moves fast in research. So if you're a very impatient patient partner, this isn't going to be good for you. Things move slow. Money doesn't come fast, whatever. So just to keep it in mind, in
I had
perspective.
Yeah, I had someone read my LinkedIn bio, and I guess I have like patient partner, and he messaged me to be like, he thought it meant I was like a patient supportive spouse, like patient partner. That just made me think about you, Deb, saying you have to be patient to do this work.
Yeah, progress is always slow, especially when it
Mhm,
comes to social ethics.
mhm.
Yeah, and I think that's where that disconnect I felt in some spaces where there are some patient partners who are looking to affect change today, and it could not be a worse fit for them.
Deb, you spoke about having difficult conversations with project teams. What advice do you have for people who, want to have those difficult conversations? What's a good, tactful, effective approach?
Um, just being as honest as possible and trying to understand it from their perspective, but getting them to understand it from your perspective as well. And don't point fingers and just say, how to. I guess it's from my years of being an auditor and having to deal with, I mean, I tell this story. There was always two lies told at the beginning of an audit. One is that you're happy to be there, and one is that they're happy to see you there. That's the first two lies. So knowing that right off the get-go, you have to work your way into the conversation and build trust. And that's the key thing is building the trust so you can have that conversation and it's not pointing fingers. It's how can we solve this together? And so that's kind of my motto.
Can you each share with me like the best patient partnership experience you have? Can you give me that example of what and why would you categorize that as the best? What makes you think this is the best? Is it something that they did to make you feel, how you participated, the outcomes, all?
It's interesting that
Opposed?
article I recently wrote. At first, I was asked by the research assistant. I was technically still in this trial as a patient, and so she asked me, "Sure. wrote it. She's like, flip it back to me if you want some feedback. Sure, I like feedback. Wrote back to her. And she was really upset by it because I had been honest about some parts of the trial that were like, yeah, tricky, or I thought could have gone better, or weren't as patient focused. And she thought it looked poorly on her and said that. And I kind of was like flustered and I'm like, oh gosh, I should rewrite it. And I did make a second version of it, but it just didn't feel right. I'm like, I've been betraying myself here. Like this doesn't feel right. So I ended up going to like the physician who's one of those like clinician scientists and said, I don't know what to do. Like I don't want to upset her, but like this isn't really my true story. And what made it a positive experience, even though it started as a bad experience, is that he was just like, listen, like she's not like this, it's not her story, it's your story. Like, let's just not keep talking to her right now. This is okay. Like, you're okay. I think it's great just the way it is. And then he just gave me, I think, really appropriate support at the right time for what something I already knew was right, but I kind of needed that, especially as it was the first time writing something only in my own voice that was going to be published. Yeah, I was fearful of like getting some sort of negative backlash or because I'm still in the trial. I'm like, oh man, if she's going to call me, she's going to be mad at me now. Like, how's that going to play out for me? Um, anyway, so in the end, I think it ended up being, um, kind of like a good news story. Um, and I'm just being LinkedIn to death, but I'll go to LinkedIn. I shared the article on LinkedIn, and at some point, some researcher in like Amsterdam read it, and then now I have all these researchers from Amsterdam who follow me, which I think is funny. Yeah, so I'd say overall positive, but also I don't. I have to also pat myself on the back because I did reach out to him and be like, "Hey, I'm struggling here. Like, I'm not sure what to do. Like, can you help me?" And he did. So it's good.
No, that is great. And it sounds like the aspect that probably makes you think of it as being a really good experience is that you were able to stay true to yourself. You kind of deep
Yeah.
down knew, and you were
Yeah.
moving away from it, but going back to it probably solidifies it as a positive experience in the end.
You
Tucker?
got it. Yeah.
Opposed to the other two, I feel like I haven't really had many negative experiences. So I have more often than not felt heard and appreciated and respected. But particularly with the Institute of Genetics, I am really enjoying my time there. I mentioned in the comments that the very first meeting that we had, it felt like um, the first real validation that I had with my struggles with my disability, because I don't know too many other people with well, I don't know anyone else except my sister who has my particular rheumatoid arthritis. Um, except now I do from working through patient partnership. So, yeah, specifically the Institute of Genetics, surprisingly, I think that they've made the best effort to be really forward thinking and in their first attempt to have their own specified patient partner group. So
Deb, a really good, solid example for you in terms of patient partnerships. Something that you take away as your best experience so far. Deb?
Oh, my very best experience?
Hmm.
Gee, true. They're tough. I guess the very best one was when I was asked to put together an osteoarthritis obesity workshop and then be a presenter and talking with, in front of surgeons and bariatric specialists and anesthetists and researchers and physiotherapists. Like they're a really tough crowd. But it was such a great experience. And I think they learned a lot from me, but I in turn learned a lot from them. So that's probably one of my best ones. And I felt like working with the team to put on this workshop, um, that they listened to what was important about having patients and patient partner, our patient voices there. It wasn't just for all the specialists and all the clinicians, so we all learned something from each other. So I'd say that was probably one of my better ones that I got so much out of.
For anyone who's participated on a research project or initiative or workshop where your own healthcare provider or healthcare team is also involved, how have you navigated that? I mean, sometimes people speak about being fearful of how this influences their direct care and their management of their condition. Um, how do you navigate that sort of patient physician care and then also working shoulder to shoulder with a physician on a research project?
I've not had that experience, so I couldn't speak to that.
Same, and I shudder at the thought of participating with my rheumatology doctor on that because I do not like her.
So maybe even from this, we know that there are opportunities. I know, Beth, you mentioned being in a trial while still speaking about it, but it sometimes is appropriate, as you've all mentioned today, in terms of setting those boundaries of like what feels right, where can I leverage my experiences, and what things you want to keep separate, even if you are reaching out to your own healthcare provider to learn about opportunities like this. We're coming up to the end of this webinar, so I really want to welcome everyone in the audience. If you have any questions that we haven't touched on, please use the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you. We've gotten such good engagement so far, and seeing a lot of people really, our conversation today reinforcing their own experiences, reminding them of their own experiences, or helping to give them that boost and that motivation to participate. So definitely the Q&A is open and please feel free to use that. While folks are putting in any final questions, maybe I can ask each of you, as you explore opportunities where you're the sole patient partner versus where you're part of groups, what are the pros and cons there? How does it really work when you're a patient partner in a group? There might be power dynamics, or there might be some just group dynamics in general. How do you navigate that versus if you're the single patient partner working directly with a research or clinical team?
Well, I was the only patient partner on the obesity osteoarthritis workshop, and um, I felt that there was a high bar that I had to kind of meet, but I don't think that they put it up. I think it was put up by myself. So I kind of had to raise myself up that bar. And I knew who my audience was going to be. And some of my friends will know that I have a bit of a potty mouth. So I had to dial down my presentation and my potty mouth. Um, but I prefer to work with teams that have other patient partners because then we can work and play to our strength. And, I might be stronger in one thing and the other patient partner or partners will be strong in other things. And I think that we bring better dynamics to the team when we have that. So that is my preference.
Beth and Tucker, any preference for working as a sole patient partner versus working in groups or councils or committees? Pros and cons in terms of sole versus group?
I'm more of a group person too. I prefer being part of a group or a council, or I think I just like the camaraderie. And I have had things where we were really a long-standing group, and sadly, one of our members passed, and we did bring in a new member. That was difficult because we kind of had a pace and a, a closeness, and this new person was more verbal and had a different style. And we're thinking like, oh. I don't really want to navigate this. Like I already do this in my like professional life all the time. But generally, if we're working on like projects or giving advice, my preference is also in, yeah, in a group.
That's great. That's a great note. So with that, I wanted to thank each of you for your time, your candor, your trust, and sharing your experiences and the work that you do. I don't say this, not enough words can explain that. It really does enhance the work. It really makes it more meaningful. And I'm so grateful. And I can tell the audience is grateful for what you've shared throughout today's webinar. I'd love to ask all of you who are attending today's webinar to please fill out a survey. I believe it will be dropped in the chat for you momentarily, and we love your input. We love your feedback. As we mentioned, we hold these webinars as part of a series. We love your input on different topics, ideas, how we can make this the most best listening and participation experience for all of you. We'd love to continue to provide content that's relevant to you. So thank you so much, Don. I do see the survey now in the chat. We'd also like to encourage you that if you want to attend webinars like this or learn about opportunities, we have something called the PXP mailing list. So you can go ahead and sign up for the PXP mailing list. This helps you to keep in touch about future webinars and opportunities. And our next one will be before the end of the year about success stories related to patient engagement in research. Don, if you can put that link in the chat as well, we'd love for you to go ahead and sign up already for that next webinar. So with that, thank you all so much. I hope you have a good rest of your evening, good rest of your day, and really appreciate your engagement. Thank you once again, Deb, Beth, and Tucker.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.